My name is Claire Miller, and the last thing I expected on that sunny morning was that my life would change forever. The lawyer's office was austere, with gray walls and leather chairs that exuded an air of formality. I sat at the table, nervous, as the man across from me began to read my father's will. Every word he uttered was a sharp knife, cutting through family ties I never imagined were so fragile. When he announced that my brother, Daniel's name, was at the head of all the family's assets and businesses, my world crumbled. Amidst the pain and betrayal, I realized I didn't fit into that narrative. Nothing is stronger than the determination of the forgotten, I thought. A phrase that had become an echo in my mind, a mantra resonating through the fog of my shock. The lawyer continued, but his voice faded into a distant hum. I was a shadow, a ghost among the memories of a childhood that now seemed so distant. My heart, heavy with betrayal, began to harden into determination. All the promises Daniel had made, that everything would be all right, became grotesque echoes of reality. My mother, Diane, always by Daniel's side, had decided it was easier to discard the rebellious daughter. This moment would become a landmark in my life. Hearing the words of abandonment, a part of me shut down in a state of coldness. I was far from the vulnerable and scorned Claire. There, a flame of revolt was ignited, forging a new plan in my mind. As an entrepreneur and digital marketing expert, I knew life was offering me a new opportunity. The family business was stagnant, and I had the means to transform it. I decided I wouldn't remain in Daniel's shadow and his illusion of control. Anger might be a weakness for many, but for me, it would be the fuel for transformation. With each scar of emotional betrayal, a new determination took hold of me. It was time to analyze the flaws in the Miller family business and chart a course for my rightful claim. The will wasn't the end, it was a beginning. The idea of revenge, cloaked in coldness and strategy, was taking shape. With the knowledge I had gained over the years, I would begin to climb the mountain that separated me from the family that had ignored me. I was about to seize the opportunity presented to me on a silver platter, transforming each denial into motivation. The table in that room might be covered with the remnants of a dark past, but upon it, I would begin my new journey. The game had begun, and I was ready to win. The memory of our childhood has always been tucked away in a corner of my mind, like a dusty album I avoided opening. Those sunny days when Daniel and I ran around the garden of our old house in Sao Paulo, changed to a generic American suburban town name, seemed so distant. I remember his infectious laughter, the way he promised we'd always be a team. At 12, I believed his protection was unshakable. But as we grew, reality revealed itself, and I was about to understand that his trust had become a mask. Daniel was always the favorite. While I struggled to be seen, he received praise and heaps of love from our mother, Diane. She looked at him with almost blind devotion, always striving to mold our family image according to the standards she deemed worthy. "We must be respectable, Claire," she'd say, her voice laced with a rigidity that cut like glass. I felt suffocated under that weight, the rebellious child who never fit the expectations. Every exaltation of my brother was a new stab at my ego, and it turned into a burning resentment that settled in my chest, a wound that never healed. I remember a birthday party when I turned 16. All the cousins came, and the house was filled with laughter and music. But when I opened my present, a purse that wasn't the one I dreamed of, that moment turned into a nightmare. Daniel was gifted a brand new tablet, and his smile was like a luminous seal in the middle of my darkness. "Happy birthday, man," the cousins shouted, while I stood in the shadows, with disappointed eyes and a broken heart. Years went by, and between family reunions and forced celebrations, small disagreements turned into major divisions. While they planned the continuity of the family business, I, on the other hand, wandered in search of my space. School offered me a temporary escape. Daniel's disinterest in my academic achievements only reinforced the idea that I should fight for my worth. From then on, I poured my energy into learning about marketing and slowly realized my ability to fix what was broken. I began to understand the workings of this cruel game called corporate life. When my father fell ill, I gained a new perspective. The fragility of life brought to the surface truths we had always tried to ignore. His death was the coin that changed my place, and at that moment, it became clear. Daniel and Diane's mission did not include the daughter who was left behind. Thus, I saw that union, which used to seem strong, reveal cracks and weaknesses like a crystal glass about to shatter. The need to control the family narrative led Daniel to a controlling role, completely excluding me from the dialogue. Daniel was trying to maintain control, aided by Diane's constant subservience. I remember one tense dinner where Diane turned to me, eyes brimming. "You're free to forge your own path, Claire, but our business is sacred. You don't understand the sacrifices we've made." Her statement was an invitation for me to quit, an attempt to guilt me for wanting to shine, to follow a different path. But the message echoing within me wasn't surrender. It was time to act. While they retreated into their narcissistic bubble, I plotted. Digital marketing promoted transitions and innovations their antiquated methods simply couldn't keep up with. Escaping the mundane had become an obsession, and I was determined to demonstrate what was possible. I mapped their social media presence, their flaws, their weaknesses. I knew the world we lived in was changing, and that I could create a business that wouldn't just compete, but would leave its mark on a sector they had abandoned. My path was clear: to convert every slight into motivation, every backward glance into a tool to shape my future. The love I had for Daniel transformed into strategy. Diane's support morphed into market analysis. And the child who once only wanted acceptance was now preparing to challenge those who had rejected her. I was no longer a spectator in my own life. I was the protagonist of a new chapter I was about to write. What was taken from me won't remain forever out of my reach. A silent promise formed on my lips. As I navigated the family's superficial interactions, the truth became evident. I didn't need them. With each step, the momentum grew. The story I was about to live would be completely different, and I was determined to claim my place. Not as an overlooked heiress, but as the true force behind the legacy the Miller family seemed to have forgotten. The rage simmering inside me had become a powerful engine, and my determination was now unshakable. With the will still fresh in my mind, I knew it was time to act. The first step in my plan was clear: thoroughly investigate the Miller family legacy. If the company was teetering on the brink of collapse, I needed to understand why. I decided to use social media as my starting point. With a sharp eye and an analytical mind, I dove into the company's online presence. It wouldn't be difficult to uncover the weaknesses Raphael and Denise were trying to hide. As a digital marketing expert, I had an arsenal of tools to play with. Through analytics software and reports, I could map the company's digital performance and reveal crucial information. The Hume analysis began with the advertising campaigns the company had launched in recent months. With a click, I tested the pulse of frustration. The data showed poorly targeted campaigns, launched at inappropriate times. Engagement was plummeting, and the lack of innovation was evident. How could they let this happen? I thought, observing the revealing numbers. The company that was once a benchmark was becoming obsolete under my brother's management. Talking to some former colleagues in the industry, the word Daniel caused hesitation and discomfort. A former employee said, "You know how he is, Claire. Always putting his ego first." This statement cut like a knife, but it also served as a warning. Daniel wasn't just my brother, but a shrewd opponent who guarded his position with a vengeance. Used the connections I still had with some of them to gather data. After several conversations, a pattern began to emerge. Daniel had become a polarizing figure, a reluctant leader. With the support of some colleagues who preferred to keep their distance from his authoritarian ways, I began to map his wrong decisions. With this information, a more concrete plan began to take shape. With each discovery, the picture became clearer. The company's social media presence was in decline, and its interactions sounded artificial, almost forced. Observing them was like looking at a rusty machine, fighting against time. It was time to create a strategy that would not only surpass them, but leave them perplexed. I focused on a central idea. I needed to show the human side that the Miller Company had forgotten. I began to draft a strategy that would include emotional videos, thought-provoking posts, and a blog to tell inspiring stories of overcoming adversity. Everything would be done with the intention of creating deep connections with the audience and reviving an image the company once possessed. It wouldn't be enough to compete. I wanted to destabilize them. As I delved deeper into my research, the weaknesses of the image Daniel and Diane were trying to protect came to light. If trust had evaporated between them and their audience, I could reclaim it in an innovative and impactful way. And so, during my solitary nights of work, I transformed frustration into a strategy. I researched content marketing, social media, and competitor analysis. This wasn't just a job. It was a mission. Every piece of data I collected, every idea that emerged, increased the certainty that the landscape was changing, and that I would be the agent of that change. From that point on, everything started to take shape. I created an outline for each video, each social media post, each blog, a narrative that spoke directly to the consumer and echoed what had been forgotten. Using authenticity and innovation, what was written would be more than an act of revenge. It would be the construction of a future where I would be recognized. As far as my determination goes, weak intentions have no place, I muttered to myself amidst charts and lists. The superficial family interactions became insignificant in the face of the immense potential before me. The space denied to me would be conquered with strategy and intelligence. And so each step brought me closer to realizing my dream. At family gatherings, I was just an outsider. But soon, the cards would be on the table. And when the time came, I would use everything I had learned to launch my own company, not as an overlooked heiress, but as a force to be reckoned with in the segment the Miller family seemed to have forgotten. The narrative was changing, and I was just getting started. I'm on a one-way street. The determination in my heart pulsed like a metronome, and each passing day, new data and revelations bloomed like flowers in a field. With each analysis I performed on the Miller Company, it became clearer that behind the facade presented to the public, there was a declining legacy. Daniel and Diane thought they could maintain superiority with strategy, but my relentless pursuit of information was about to change the game. Using my acquired digital marketing knowledge, I employed a series of market analysis tools to decipher every move of the family business. A social media scanning platform revealed a worrying pattern. Posts were becoming increasingly scarce, and when they did occur, they were frequently ignored. This was an opening, a sign that the company was not only failing to connect with the public but had also lost the trust of its customers. Comments on posts revealed discontent, disdain, and even jokes at the brand's expense. I tracked every small mention, every piece of feedback, converting each observation into crucial data. That's how, one day, I discovered a user who wrote, "What happened to Miller's?" It used to be a benchmark, and now it's a joke those who still cared about what the company could have been. An inside perspective would be what made me triumph. A former colleague, Peter, who now worked for a competing company, decided to help me. Meeting with him, I understood that Daniel was overwhelmed. The weight of managing the company had undoubtedly fallen on his shoulders, but instead of seeking innovation, he clung to the methods that had brought success in the past, but were now clearly outdated. This made the company vulnerable, and I was about to exploit that vulnerability. "Claire, I don't know if this is the best path, but it could be useful for you. Miller's really isn't paying attention to market needs. They isolate themselves in their comfort bubble. It's time for someone to shake them up," Peter said, looking directly into my eyes. It was the moment I needed, an encouragement that pushed my desire to succeed. I conducted more in-depth research on competitors, especially those excelling in innovation. Studying their practices, I noticed a growing trend that used much more visual and participatory content. Consumers craved engagement, not a distant company that only launched vague products. With these insights, I began planning a series of innovations for my future campaign. I understood that part of what I needed to offer was a new concept for the brand itself. To provoke significant change, a reinterpretation would be essential. If Miller's was to stop being a joke for consumers, it would have to rescue its original values and win back the hearts of its customers. And at the same time, it was they who would probably be willing to leave Daniel and Diane behind, just as I had. I began building a comprehensive plan that included impactful videos, testimonials from satisfied customers, and collaborations with influencers who had already distanced themselves from Miller's. I created detailed personas to better understand how to approach communication, planning posts that would capture the essence of what the brand could be. As the days passed, my feeling of empowerment grew. I ceased being a spectator. I was in constant motion, experimenting with new ideas, and even on days when my self-confidence wavered, the desire for change kept me firm. The feeling that I could transform everything made me stronger with each new insight that emerged. What encouraged me was the freedom I had to shape it all my way, without the family ties that, for so long, had confined me to obscurity. The day I launched my brand would be the day I rewrote my story, overcoming every clamor and criticism I had received. The night before the final pitch was marked by anxiety, but, more than ever, I was ready. With a prepared presentation, I presented my ideas and concepts to a small group of investors. The presentation, which I had meticulously developed, covered everything I had learned and discovered, what Miller's was doing wrong, what the market wanted, and how I could be the answer. The reactions were instantaneous. There was a gleam in their eyes when they realized that, despite the shadow Daniel and Diane had cast over the company, there was hope there. With that, the group began discussing funding, and I found myself with a nearly finished project, finally embarking on something that could alter the narrative of my life. Amidst all the new euphoria, what was needed was execution. An unrelenting will, a well-crafted plan, and a clear goal ahead. The moment of truth was approaching, and I was about to do what once seemed impossible. The Miller Company wouldn't have a clue about the future that was about to vanish. And me? I would be the force behind the change, a name that would stand not as a mere heiress, but as the creator of an authentic, reborn legacy. The day of my campaign launch finally arrived. A mixture of anxiety and excitement washed over me as I prepared to present my vision to the world. I was fully aware that this was my chance to rewrite not only my own story, but also the narrative of the brand I was about to introduce to the market. Sitting in a brightly lit room with a projector in front of me and the murmur of investors behind, I took a deep breath and scanned the audience watching me intently. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and I felt a surge of adrenaline, something I hadn't felt since my father passed away. I looked at the familiar and unfamiliar faces awaiting my ideas, and in that moment, a fierce desire for recognition consumed me. Thank you all for being here today. Let's cut to the chase, I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in those first syllables. My heart pounded, but my mind was focused. The presentation I had prepared wasn't just a summary of the weaknesses of the Miller legacy, but a captivating vision of how I intended to change the landscape. The first part of the presentation addressed the glaring failures of the old family management. It presented data showing the decline in engagement and the negative perception of the brand. The numbers spoke for themselves, and I displayed them like an artist showcasing their masterpiece. Here's the proof that a strong brand requires more than just being present in the market. It requires authenticity and connection, I continued, showing comparisons with the strategies of competing companies that were excelling. The investors began to lean forward, visibly intrigued. My explanation of how brands that would survive needed to adapt to the new digital world resonated with them. I talked about storytelling, the importance of building a genuine dialogue with consumers, and how to create a campaign that used these strategies to reconnect with the audience. But I was also aware that I needed to go beyond the data. I needed to touch hearts. Miller isn't just a company, it's an idea, a legacy. I paused, observing each expression among those listening intently. And this legacy can be redeemed with a new vision, a fresh perspective that transforms this brand into a synonym for innovation and relevance. I presented my innovative project with enthusiasm and clarity. A digital platform that integrated technology, community, and creativity, bringing to the forefront what truly mattered to people. The proposal wasn't limited to simple products. It spoke of experiences, emotions, and a new way of relating to the public. I talked about impactful videos, engaging content, and relationship-building campaigns that would bring Miller back to the hearts of consumers. It's time to reclaim the essence of Miller and make it part of every customer's life again, I declared, delivering the final point with conviction. I am ready to lead this change and rebuild the trust that has been lost. After the presentation, silence filled the room. For a moment, time seemed to stop. But soon applause erupted, filling the room with such force that my heart nearly leaped again. But now for a very different reason. The investors were enthusiastic, a clear sign that the message had penetrated. Looking at the faces that had previously seemed distant, I now saw hope and, more importantly, support. We began to discuss the financial details, and it wasn't long before we began to form an alliance that I believed would become fundamental to the rebirth of the Miller brand. In the following days, our team gathered to begin the transformation work. I began to claim my space, restructuring the priorities that Miller had neglected. One by one, each idea and insight I had gained in the past became part of a new narrative. As the campaign took shape, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and happiness. It was a complete turnaround from everything I had experienced before. In new conversations and meetings, and even in front of my new investors, I was a new Claire, stronger and more resilient. However, with the growth of the new brand, divisions also arose. Information began to surface about the reactions of my mother and Daniel. Both were aware of the growing momentum of my campaign, and inevitably, resistance began to take hold. Daniel tried to belittle my new company, insinuating that I lacked sufficient experience. "What do you know about our business, Claire? You're not a part of it. We all know data can lie," he said in a sharp tone. His words echoed in my mind, but at the same time, fueled my determination. Relying on his family, influence, he once again exposed his fear and insecurity. The truth was that I had not only begun to challenge his authority, but also shown the world that there was much more to the Miller legacy than he would ever acknowledge. In response, I decided to launch a series of awareness campaigns that I highlighted on social media. The new Miller wasn't just dedicated to rescuing the brand's legacy, it was committed to connecting with the underserved. Miller, where history meets innovation, was our tagline. Even when the movement felt risky, I knew each step would be crucial to solidifying the brand, and more importantly, regaining consumer trust and love. In every interaction, I focused on dialogue and relationship building, something Daniel would never have done. That's where the true strength of the new Miller resided. It wasn't just an advertising campaign, it was a conversation, a genuine connection between the brand and the audience it served. And so, as the new Miller identity took hold, I felt the shift not only in the market, but also within myself. I was no longer the overlooked heiress, but the architect of a new legacy. The future of the company was, finally, in the hands of someone who truly cared about its purpose. The true landscape was forming, and I was determined to lead my vision forward, challenging anyone who dared to underestimate it, revealing that, ultimately, nothing would be stronger than the determination of the forgotten. As the new Miller campaign began gaining traction, the tension between me and the family's old guard intensified. My adversaries were now those who shared my last name, increasingly aligned with outdated traditions, while I emerged as a force of innovation, ready to challenge the status quo. As each post went live and garnered positive feedback, I felt the tide turning in my favor. However, as expected, Daniel wouldn't remain a passive figure in all this. Unhappy to see his influence waning, he launched a series of attacks on social media, disparaging not only my initiatives, but insinuating that my youth and lack of experience rendered me incapable of managing the brand. "What do you know about our business, Claire? You're not part of it. We all know data can lie," he repeated in a live stream, his malicious tone resonating like a public service announcement gone wrong. These words, though challenging, only fueled my determination. It was clear Daniel was exposing his own fear and insecurity. His dependence on family influence became evident. He didn't realize he was merely sealing his own downfall. In response, I launched a series of social media campaigns to capture the voice of consumers and engage the community. Miller. Where history meets innovation became our motto. I knew that every step of the campaign was vital to rebuilding the brand's image and regaining consumer confidence. In all interactions, I prioritized dialogue and relationship building, something Daniel would never dare to do. As the new Miller identity solidified, I felt a shift not only in the market, but also within my own being. I was no longer the overlooked heiress, but the architect of a new legacy. The future of the company was finally in the hands of someone who truly cared about its purpose. I knew I needed to guide my vision forward and confront anyone who underestimated my power, revealing that nothing was stronger than the determination of the forgotten. The big challenge arrived when I began planning a community festival to celebrate the new Miller. With activities that would unite consumers and the brand, I planned an event that would demonstrate the new philosophy of it not just being about sales, but about experiences. The idea was to transform Miller into a name that people associated with their own life stories. The festival would become the perfect stage to showcase this, aligning the brand with the community spirit. On the other hand, Daniel didn't stand still. He used his traditional rhetoric at an industry gathering to try to discredit my new approach. "A legacy cannot be altered overnight," he proclaimed, his dismissive tone echoing through the auditorium as if he were trying to galvanize support. But even so, the winds of change were beginning to blow in my favor. On the day of the festival, the entire team was buzzing with excitement. The space was filled with energy and anticipation, with product booths, food, and of course music that energized the audience. As I addressed the crowd in the moments leading up to the event, I looked around and saw familiar and new faces, and a wave of emotion washed over me. "Hold on to the present and keep your eyes on the future," I reminded myself. That was the most important path. However, as expected, Daniel made an unexpected and tense appearance. He decided to try to overshadow the new image that was emerging. "Miller needs to remember its roots, not get lost in modernist fantasies," he shouted arrogantly, attempting to capture the crowd's attention. At this crucial moment, I couldn't let that provocation compromise everything I had built. Taking a deep breath, I sought to maintain my composure, and with a smile on my face, addressed him from a distance. "Daniel, Miller isn't here to forget its roots. We're here to show the world that tradition and innovation can coexist," I replied, my voice echoing firmly over the noise of the audience. The crowd responded with warm applause. The energy of supportive consumers remained palpable, and the excitement in the air became contagious. Daniel protested, but the wind had already changed. His rejection of change was increasingly becoming an isolated reaction. The festival was a resounding success, and the vibrant energy in the air breathed new life into Miller. The brand began to resonate as a symbol of renewal, and I felt like I was leading a revolution that went far beyond products. Consumer stories intertwined with the Miller narrative, and they weren't just buying. They were reconnecting with a legacy that seemed forgotten. However, Daniel and Diane's resistance remained strong. The tension at family meetings became unbearable. Diane was visibly distraught and desperately tried to mediate the growing divide. "Claire, you can't ignore what Miller has always stood for. We're losing our essence," she said, her voice heavy with concern. But this time, I held firm. There was a growing community of supporters who believed in the new vision for Miller. The brand had become more than numbers. It was now the voice of a new generation. I was determined to align our communication with the values of balancing tradition and innovation, proving that Miller could reinvent itself without sacrificing its roots. Among the advancements came the idea for a new campaign called Miller, Our Stories. The goal was to bring consumers' experiences to the forefront, showcasing that our personal connections were the true heart of the brand. Through video testimonials, the campaign would honor the stories consumers had with Miller, proving that the past and present could coexist. The festival we were organizing would be a landmark for the launch of this new campaign, and the excitement on the team was palpable. Every person involved was committed to making the event a celebration of the new Miller and its intersection with consumers. I found myself marveling at bringing everyone together around a single goal, building a new reality that reflected all of us. However, Daniel, in his attempt to discredit the new approach, began making snide remarks about Miller, insinuating that the change was misrepresenting the company. "What's always worked shouldn't be changed just for an audience that doesn't even care anymore," he proclaimed at a family meeting. His disdain became increasingly evident, but the resistance to his vision was growing. On the day of the festival, the atmosphere was buzzing with anticipation. Upbeat music echoed as people gathered around the booths, sharing laughter and stories. The energy was infectious, and as I witnessed all that unity, I realized I was finally making the dream a reality. But immediately after the opening, Daniel's arrival at the event didn't go unnoticed. He approached the stage, a smile on his face, but his eyes revealed hostility. He turned the moment into a platform to reiterate his message of tradition and resistance. "How can we move forward without acknowledging who we truly are?" he said, his rhetoric attempting to sow division and doubt. Gathering my courage, I stepped onto the stage and, with a smile to the crowd, interrupted his tirade. "Daniel, Miller isn't abandoning its roots, but allowing itself to grow. By honoring our past, we are building a future we can all share. The true strength of Miller is in all of us, in our stories," I declared, the crowd responding with applause and encouragement. At that moment, the atmosphere shifted. Daniel, faced with the crowd's rejection, realized his message didn't resonate. The community's support, the courage in defending what had been built, caused the crowd to unite under a single purpose. The festival continued, and the shared stories became the climax of the event. Each testimonial showed how the new Miller wasn't just a commercial entity, but a community of voices, alive and vibrant. As the event concluded, the sense of belonging was clear. Miller had become more than a product. It was now an essential part of the life of every person involved. Reflecting on the journey while watching the crowd, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The time of being forgotten was over. I was leading, a movement that honored our family legacy while bringing hope and innovation. Now was the time to confidently move forward, and I was finally ready to embrace a new reality, solidifying Miller as a vibrant force in the marketplace, uniting tradition with creativity, without compromising our values. And so, the future resonated. With promise, full of possibilities I was determined to explore.